Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Andrew. We are the IB English guys. Folks, we are very excited to share a project that we've been working on with Revision Village. We have past paper responses to all the paper ones, and we've also broken down all the past paper 2 questions. This is some of our best work.
Yeah, we hope that it provides students with a lot of rich ideas about how to deconstruct a text for paper 1, as well as how to write that paper 1 response, and how to deconstruct paper 2 questions to arrive at a really good response.
That's right. We'd like to share one of those videos for free with you right now on our channel. If you like what you see, go to Revision Village. There's tons more to review for the upcoming exams.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. Welcome to this Revision Village exclusive where we're going to talk about the May 2023 Paper 1 exam.
That's right, Mr. Giles. This is a text. It's a podcast transcript, and this topic of this podcast is empathy. We need to have a definition of empathy because that's in the guiding question. Mr. Giles, what's empathy?
Yeah, empathy is when we understand and share the feelings of another person. So it's that deep understanding of putting ourselves in another person's shoes. This is what empathy is, and it's kind of lacking in the world.
Yeah, what do you say we dive into the text now and explore the guiding question? The guiding question for this text is as follows. How and to what effect is empathy presented in the text? How and to what effect is empathy presented in the text? All right, Mr. Giles, what do you notice about the opening of our podcast transcript?
Well, first of all, the title of the podcast, The War for Kindness, is something to unpack and think about. This is a metaphor because we're talking about fighting a war, but we're actually fighting a war for kindness. And that's that juxtaposition of war and kindness is interesting. It's thought-provoking.
Yeah, it is thought-provoking. We need to think about this is something that's going to require some work. We see a second metaphor in the subtitle, which is also in boldface, but this one is referring to a happiness lab. Now, a lab is a place where we have to do experimentation. We're testing theories. Work is being done in there. So I think the implication is that to achieve happiness in our world, we're going to have to put in some work from our side.
That's right. And that's what they're saying about empathy, that empathy takes some work. Now, no, I think the logo of the podcast is worth just a brief mention. I like the way the words are formatted to simulate a happy face. And we have that color yellow, which again connotes happiness and pleasant feelings. And this is what the purpose of this podcast is. Then we have a prelude or an introduction, which is kind of a synopsis of what the episode's about. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed in this prelude or the synopsis, I see the second person language you. It's nice. They're immediately closing the distance between the listener and the podcast speaker. And I also see a third metaphor. They're talking about an unhappy path. What is this unhappy path?
Yeah, first of all, they talk about how, belonging is a good thing, but there's an unhappy path of hatred and violence. And that's the path of division that happens when we belong to one group, but that we treat the other group with hatred and violence, and we don't understand where they're coming from. This is a problem.
It's a problem. It links to a lot of that tribalism we see today. Now, once they've sort of the podcast host has sort of called out the listeners with you, I notice a quick switch to inclusive language, the we, and then I see some parallel structure. We can fight hatred with empathy, kindness, and difficult conversation, sort of a tricolon, a 3-pronged approach, a solution to this problem.
That's right. We're going to talk about that difficult conversations and that being a really important part of that tricolon. Then we have in the transcript itself, it's interesting because we have timestamps and we want to pay attention to those. What's noteworthy about the time?
Well, what's noteworthy, Mr. Giles, this is clearly an excerpt from the transcript. We're starting at 16 minutes, so that leads me to believe that we've missed a lot of the opening introductions, a lot of the pleasantries. We've missed that. We're going straight for the meat of this podcast. We need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, this might be an hour-long podcast. We're just getting a little snapshot of a bigger part, so that's important. It's been excerpted. The first part of this particular excerpt has an introduction to Jamil Zaki. He's a professor of psychology at Stanford, so his title and his universities, he's got a lot of ethos. We also notice that he's written a new book. Now, a lot of times podcasts have a secondary purpose of advertising the book that a person has published. So this is, again, part of the purpose of the podcast.
Yeah, and the book that is being advertised or spoken about references a fractured world. I think that adjective fractured is really interesting. The connotation that there's something broken in our society. Something is broken in our world. And this podcast is going to address that and hopefully give us some solutions to tackle that problem.
That's right. And now Zaki is explaining the process of writing his book. He uses colloquial language, which is quite common in a podcast because it's a conversation, but also it makes him more accessible and builds his ethos, and that's kind of interesting. And he says he can't quite put his finger on what it was that was that was changing in the culture because he's seeing that division.
Sounds like a personal anecdote, Mr. Giles. He's referencing something he experienced. He also is self-deprecating with humor, and he refers to himself as a Pollyanna. And again, some more informal language like, hey, you can choose empathy. Mr. Giles, talk to me about the Pollyanna.
A Pollyanna is that allusion to a character who is overly optimistic and is kind of sugarcoating things. And this is what he felt like he was being, because he was just kind of almost sounding like he was being too optimistic about the situation. Like, hey, we need to be positive and have more and choose empathy.
Meanwhile, we got this giant tire fire. We've got this really clear simile. That conjures up memories of things we see on the news and media with people protesting, people fighting, people arguing. We don't have empathy and harmony in the world. He's comparing our society to a giant tire fire. Really provocative language there. More than ever. Very high modality language. He's saying more than ever, people are hating each other, and this is what society is right now. We need a solution.
That's right. And then Santos follows up with some information of their own, where they're talking about that Jamil's war for kindness is an uphill battle. So it's extending that metaphor of just how difficult it is to actually maintain kindness and empathy. And this is, again, the purpose. Then we offer some statistics about why this is an uphill battle. Talk about that.
Well, Mr. Giles, so far we haven't had a lot of statistics, or we've had a lot of opinions, but we need some credible statistics here to give the argument some meat, right? So by saying that American empathy has dropped to 3.5 from 5, that shows a clear statistical decrease, and that supports the main argument that empathy is down and we need a solution.
Yeah, and there's the tire fire, right? Okay, then Zaki have another soundbite from Zaki where he talks about how empathy is perceived that it's just a transfer. In other words, I have empathy and I transfer it to somebody else, and that means I sacrifice my empathy. They actually refute that claim.
Yeah, that's somewhat ironic because that's what they posit, but they say that's not true. They say when somebody exercises empathy, it's not just transferring from one to the other, but it's actually a two-way street, Mr. Giles. And what are some of the great things, what some of the great benefits we see through parallel structure and those tricolon of examples? What are some things that happen?
Yeah, so when I actually show empathy, that I actually end up being happier, less stressed, and I have less depression. So it's actually showing how this is benefiting the person giving the empathy.
Yeah, and moreover, you can make new friends, you can maintain important relationships, and they even give an example about a 7th grader who was able to survive. So again, that tricolon of examples is building on the logos. They're making this logical argument that empathy is a way to sort of to extinguish these tire fires.
That's right, and that would it's beneficial to the person. Now, we also notice that Santos talks about, and this is the host talking about, empathy is a skill. And this is what they say, this is the claim they're making about empathy, is that it's something you can learn and you can get better at.
Yeah, we see another anecdote where Zaki references a super hard assignment, quite colloquial, that he gave to his students at Stanford. And we see references to racist Facebook posting uncles. Tell me about that precise diction. That's interesting.
Well, the part of the idea is they're trying to cultivate that curiosity for empathy and actually to learn the stories of other people. So part of the experiment was for the students to actually have those hard conversations with racist face-posting uncles. In other words, learn their story. And this is somebody who's vastly different from the students, but that's the point.
Well, yeah, and that paragraph concludes, we see the juxtaposition of outcomes. Rather than ending in frustration and tears, those conversations lead to better than expected results. So what we think might happen actually doesn't happen, and we improve empathy and we increase understanding. It all comes down to narratives, Mr. Giles. What can we say here?
Yeah, so this is part of the solution, and that juxtaposition of and how that when you start with narratives, when you actually learn the story of somebody else instead of calling them names or calling them out on things, actually what happens is that it benefits them. It doesn't matter that you agree on every point.
That's right. And now we see some high modality words. We see no one should feel like they're obligated to connect. No one has to do this. It's not anybody's job. So they're saying you don't have to do this, but you kind of do, because if you do,
yeah,
what will happen?
It's going to help everybody, right? It's going to help to this idea of like people on the other side are actually waiting for a chance to be human and to be recognized. And this is the point of the entire podcast and what they're saying about empathy.
Yeah, I think it really does a nice job of wrapping up that war metaphor while then fighting those people on the other side. We need to tell stories and listen to them. Folks, in the end, we hope you enjoyed going through this podcast transcript. We hope you have a deeper understanding. Stay in the Revision Village platform. You'll see the sample answer and continue working through the past papers. You will be successful on your Paper 1 endeavors. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.